You're about to witness one of the most dramatic political downfalls in modern U.S. history. Imagine a man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with the president, now sitting alone in a Senate hearing room, sweating under the spotlight, cornered by questions that could end his career. That's exactly what happened to Senator Lindsey Graham. From trusted ally to hunted target, what went wrong? And more importantly, who was really behind the fall? If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story has everything. Power plays, international intrigue, and a Senate hearing that felt more like a courtroom drama than a legislative debate. Senator Graham didn't just lose support overnight. It was a slow burn, fueled by a $400,000 hotel bill in Kyiv, suspicious trips to Ukraine, and a mysterious trail of money leading through Latvia. The media exploded. Social media lit up. And suddenly, the man South Carolina once trusted was facing calls for resignation from his own constituents. But let me be clear. I'm not here to rehash headlines. There are plenty of those already. What I'm offering is something different. A deep dive into the real story behind the scandal. Not just the facts, but the motives, the players, and the consequences. Let's start at the beginning. Not with the allegations, but with the man himself. Lindsey Graham has been in Washington for decades. He's seen it all, fought every battle, survived every storm. But this time, it feels different. He wasn't just being questioned about foreign policy. He was being accused of personal gain, of using his influence for profit, of turning diplomacy into a business deal. And when John Kennedy started asking the hard questions, Graham began to crack. Now, if you've ever watched a Senate hearing, you know they can be dry, boring even. But this one, it was electric. You could feel the tension in the air, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling notes furiously, and Graham sitting there, trying to stay composed while Kennedy tore through his alibis one by one. Kennedy didn't just ask questions. He pressed them hard, like a prosecutor who already had the confession and was just waiting for the defendant to admit it. "Senator Graham," he said, flipping through pages of documents like they were playing cards, "I hear you're quite fond of Kyiv, enough to spend over $800,000 in taxpayer money on a few trips. Care to explain?" Graham tried to deflect. Talked about national security, about strengthening alliances, about standing up to Russia. But Kennedy wasn't buying it. "National security," he replied, raising an eyebrow. "Or personal interest? Because your hotel bill looks more like a luxury retreat than a diplomatic mission?" The room buzzed. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some laughed. Others sat in stunned silence. Graham's face flushed. His hands gripped the edge of the table. And for the first time in his long career, he looked truly nervous. Now, before we go any further, let me make something clear. I'm not saying Graham is guilty. I'm not here to pass judgment. What I am doing is showing you how quickly public perception can shift, and how easily someone who once seemed untouchable can find themselves backed into a corner. Because that's what this story is really about. Power, perception, and the fine line between serving the country and serving yourself. What made this hearing so explosive wasn't just the accusations. It was the way they were presented. Kennedy didn't just throw out rumors. He had documents, emails, financial records. And worst of all, a name that made Graham's blood run cold. Cash Patel, a former Trump aide turned investigator with a reputation for digging up secrets others wanted buried. And he wasn't just sniffing around anymore. He was closing in. Patel wasn't working alone. He had access, resources, and most importantly, protection. Because this wasn't just a personal crusade. It was part of a larger strategy, a message to anyone who thought they could play both sides and get away with it. And Graham, he knew Patel better than most. knew how ruthless he could be, how far he'd go to expose the truth. Which is why, when Patel's name came up in the hearing, Graham froze. Not just physically, mentally. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about survival. Let's rewind for a moment. Let's talk about how this all started. Because the roots of this scandal go deeper than a single hearing or a few questionable expenses. It starts with Ukraine, a war-torn country caught in the crosshairs of global geopolitics. And Graham, for years, positioned himself as one of its strongest advocates in the Senate. He visited multiple times, met with officials, pushed for aid packages, and every trip came with a cost. One that, until recently, no one paid much attention to. But then someone did. Someone asked the question everyone else was too afraid to. Who exactly was paying for these trips? And why did the numbers keep adding up to something that didn't quite make sense? That question led to an audit, then to a whistleblower, then to a chain of emails pointing to a Latvian shell company with ties to a fund in South Carolina. And that fund? It was linked to someone close to Graham, Charles Hargrove, his former campaign manager. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. What was once seen as patriotism started to look more like self-interest. And the more people dug, the worse it got. Now, I want to pause here and say something important. Allegations are not proof. Suspicion is not guilt. But when pattern after pattern starts lining up, when you see repeated trips, unexplained expenses, and financial trails that don't add up, it raises serious questions. And that's exactly what Cash Patel was counting on. Because Patel understood something most politicians don't. In the age of social media and viral outrage, perception becomes reality faster than you can say, press release. And once that happens, there's no going back. So what did Patel do? He built a case, piece by piece, document by document, email by email. He didn't just chase rumors. He followed the money, and what he found was damning. Payments routed through Baltic Ventures, contracts signed under vague terms, consulting fees that conveniently lined up with Graham's visits overseas, and a trail of digital footprints that suggested this wasn't just poor oversight, it was intentional obfuscation. But here's where things get complicated, because while Patel may have had the evidence, he didn't have immunity. And Graham still had allies, powerful ones, which means this wasn't just a legal issue. It was a political war. And in Washington, wars aren't fought in courtrooms. They're fought in headlines, in leaks, in backroom deals, and in carefully timed revelations. Patel knew that, which is why he didn't just gather information. He weaponized it. He leaked parts of the report, not all of it. Just enough to create momentum, to stir the pot, to force the press to ask questions the establishment didn't want answered. And it worked. Within hours, Number Investigate Graham was trending. News outlets picked up the story. Columnists weighed in. And for the first time in his career, Graham found himself not just under scrutiny, but under siege. But let's not forget, Graham isn't stupid. He knows how Washington works. He's played the game longer than most. So when the pressure mounted, he did what any seasoned politician would do. He pushed back. He denied. He deflected. He attacked. I did everything for national security, he told reporters outside the Capitol. If we don't stand with Ukraine, Russia wins. That's not corruption. That's leadership. But the problem was, nobody believed him anymore. And that's when the cracks really started to show. Because it wasn't just the press questioning him. It wasn't just the opposition. Even members of his own party began to distance themselves. Dick Blumenthal, a longtime ally, refused to speak up in his defense. Rand Paul remained neutral. And John Kennedy? Well, he was clearly enjoying every second of it. There's a saying in politics, when the music stops, someone always ends up without a chair. And in this case, Graham was starting to realize he might be the one left standing. Now, I want to take a step back and talk about what this all means beyond the headlines, because this isn't just about one senator or one investigation. This is about the shifting landscape of American politics, about how power is no longer defined by seniority or experience, but by transparency, accountability, and the ability to survive in an era where every move is recorded, analyzed, and judged within minutes. In many ways, this is the new normal. Politicians used to operate in shadows. Now they're under constant surveillance, not just from watchdog groups, but from citizens with smartphones and social media accounts. And that changes everything, because when you know the world is watching, you have to be careful. Every expense, every meeting, every decision. And if you're not careful, someone like Cash Patel will come knocking. So, what happens next? Well, Graham isn't done yet. He still has options. He still has connections. He still has the means to fight back. But let's be clear, the tide has turned. The momentum is no longer in his favor. And unless he finds a way to flip the narrative quickly and decisively, he might not survive this politically. The walls are closing in, and even his most loyal allies are beginning to look uneasy. As for Patel, he's not backing down either, because for him, this isn't just about Graham. It's bigger. It's about setting a precedent. It's about sending a message, not just to Graham, but to every elected official who has ever assumed they were beyond reach. No one is. Let me leave you with this final thought. We often think of democracy as something confined to ballot boxes, campaign rallies, and slogans. That's only part of the story. Democracy also lives in accountability. It breathes in hearings where power is questioned. It rises in investigations where truth is pursued relentlessly. It grows in voices that refuse to stay silent, even when silence is the easier path. This isn't just political theater. It's a test of the system, a test of whether the public will remain passive or demand transparency. And if this entire saga has revealed one thing, it's this. The people are awake. The people are watching. The people are listening. And when something doesn't add up, they don't let it slide. So if you've made it this far, thank you for being part of this unfolding story. But don't just scroll away. Like this video to support real journalism. Comment with your thoughts. We read everything. Share it with someone who still believes that truth matters. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because if you thought this was intense, just wait until next week. The stakes are rising. The players are shifting. And the next move, it could change everything. Stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next.